I want to take a look at our passage this morning. It is the only instance where we ever hear about the wise men in the Bible from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, the first 12 verses. And let us hear the word of the Lord. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem of Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me, so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went their way. And the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chest and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. May God bless this reading and hearing of His most holy and inspired word. First of all, let me tell you that this particular message is based on a quote from John Maxwell that I once read, and it really caused me to think. In fact, if you'll take a look in your notes, and you'll see the quote that I listed there, and it's where I want to take us this morning. It's going to set up the whole sermon of where we're going. He wrote, in Matthew chapter 2, we read the story of the wise men following the star. And based on that scripture, the question I have for you is, what happens when you've been following a star and it leads you to a stable? What happens when all of a sudden, after thinking that something grand and glorious would be at the other end, you end up in the backyard of a barn? And there, instead of a palace and a king on a throne, you find a little baby held by his mother. It's nothing like what you had anticipated. How do you react when you follow a star and find a stable? How is your conduct affected by the outcome of your expectations? The reality is that for many of us, the difference between what we expect to happen and the reality of what happens is very often disappointment. This morning I want to talk about expectations. How many of us have had times when we were disappointed because what we thought was going to happen didn't happen? For the wise men, they expected to find a king in a palace in Jerusalem. Of course, that's where he would be born. But they found him miles away from the place they expected. Now, how many of you have ever heard of the actress Helen Hayes? Somebody, oh yeah, okay, this is the right service for this. I understand that there was a story. Evidently, she wasn't a very good cook. And after years of marriage, she decided that she was going to give cooking the Thanksgiving turkey a try. So she announced her intentions to her husband and her son, and on that day, she gathered both of them around the table, and she said to them, "You know that I am not a very good cook. I know that. And I just want you to know that this turkey may not come out very well. And," she said, "if I bring the turkey out to the table and it's not any good, I don't want you to say a word. Just quietly get up, put on your coat and your hat, and we will go to the restaurant and we will eat. But do not say a word." Kind of nervously, she went back into the kitchen. She placed the turkey on the platter. She carried it into the dining room, only to see that her husband and her son were standing there with their coats and their hats. A great story of expectations not being very high. Now, can you imagine the surprise for those wise men when they followed that star, some grand announcement in the sky? And they realized that it wasn't leading them to a palace or to the great city of Jerusalem, but instead it led them to a house in a small town of Bethlehem. That had to have been confusing. I know it was for Herod and so many others in Jerusalem. The reality is we all have expectations of how things are supposed to go. They saw the sign that announced literally the Messiah's birth. God had made it so obvious. But isn't that how God is? We believe He has a plan. We believe that He leads us to places and situations and brings people into our lives. But so often, our expectations run ahead of what God is really trying to do. I mean, have you ever had a time in your life when you literally expected one thing and you got something completely different? Some of us, we can think after leaving high school, we had such ambitious dreams and hopes of what life was going to be and what we were going to accomplish. But those plans were changed for one reason or another. How about your expectation of marriage? You thought your mate would be one kind of person, but all of a sudden ended up being another kind. Maybe it was your kids. You know, most of us have real high expectation for our kids. But as they grow, sometimes the expectations are far from reality. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes they exceed our expectations. But too often when we face things in life, we are disappointed. Maybe you found that in your career, or maybe from what you expected when you retired, or what you expected from yourself, or from your church, or even from God Himself. All of us have had those times in our lives when things did not turn out as well as we expected. And the beautiful part of this portion of the Christmas story is what the wise men do when they search and find Jesus in this somewhat confusing place. Their actions, I believe, teach us how to deal with situations when they aren't exactly what we expect. First of all, in your notes, the wise men actually went in and looked for Jesus in the stable. You know, one of the things I like about the Bible is that the writers never make the Bible characters better than they really are. They tell you just like it is. And when you look at them and their situations, you see that many times their expectations were never filled. But yet they seemingly had the ability to see the good in a bad situation. What does Paul do when he is in prison? He writes letters of encouragement to those who are free and walking around. What does David do when he is hiding in a cave? He writes the 23rd Psalm. What does Job do when he has lost his family and all of his possessions and his body is covered in boils? He writes, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And what does Joseph do after 30 some odd years when his dream still hasn't been fulfilled? He continues to obey God and he finds favor. And here's what I found when it comes to the difference between immature Christians and mature ones. Immature Christians see God only in the good. But mature Christians see God in the good and the bad. It may not be a situation I like, but I know that God is here, that He is trying to teach me something. In fact, one of the greatest tests of the maturity of our faith is what we do in the midst of a bad situation. Do we continue to trust God, or do we begin to question and doubt? Do we begin to take over and think if it's to be, it's up to me? See, when immature Christians are in a bad situation, they say, God changed my circumstance. When mature Christians are in a bad situation, they say, God changed my heart. And there's a world of difference. The wise men tell us when you are in a situation where you are following a star and you find a stable, don't throw your hands up. Don't scream and complain. Don't say, God must have made a mistake. We must have misread the situation. There's no way this could be right. Instead, they went and they looked in and they found. And all of us could tell of a time when we followed a star and found a stable. Many of us could talk about how God had made some great things happen out of bad situations. I know I could share many stories myself. Take a look at this in your notes. To continue to hope in God in the face of life's nakedness was expressed by a group of Jews who hid out from the Nazi Gestapo during World War II. On the wall of their hideout, before they were discovered, they had written with a piece of coal this affirmation: I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when feeling it not. I believe in God even when He is not there. And I love the quote from Charles Spurgeon: God is too good to be unkind. He is too wise to be confused. If I cannot trace His hand, I can always trust His heart. When you and I face tough situations, confusing situations, areas where we are prone to become disappointed, people of faith, people of maturity, look at the situation and say, okay, I don't understand why, but I'm going to trust. And I'm going to move forward believing that God is in the midst of whatever He's doing sometimes, but I'm going to trust Him. The wise men could have questioned the whole situation, thinking that it didn't make any sense, and they could have pulled up short and gone back home. But they went and they searched and they found. The God of Abraham, the second, the one who had been foretold, was just in another place than they had expected. But then we learn the second thing. That was the wise men offered their very best to God. Now, when we don't get our way, know what our temptation is. Our temptation, when things don't go as we expected, we tend to hold back from giving our best. Isn't that true? You know, the difference between the average person and the above average individual can be summed up in 3 words. And then some. It's easy to give our best when everything's going great, but what about when we're in the middle of a mess? Are you an and then some kind of person? Or because things aren't going your way, you tend to withhold, you would tend to withdraw. I mean, it's kind of what happens in the church for too many Christians. When the church isn't going the way we think it should go, what's the first thing we withhold? Our money. And then if we still don't like what's happening, we stop going. But you know, there may be a mess in the church for a reason. God may be trying to move us, and it may be one of those growing pains that He's trying to use to teach us. And what the wise men say is, rather than withhold, give your best. Do your best. Now, the other reality that comes is, and we know this, our emotions often determine our commitment. Rather than our commitment determining our actions, we let our emotions determine our commitment, which then determines our actions. Things are going great, we'll support. Things aren't, we're not supporting. Let me ask you, is this a church of God?
Yes.
Okay, good. So you have any word there for me? Yes. This is God's church. For those of you who are members, this is the church that you have made the decision to commit to be a part of, to support with your time and your talents and your treasure. This is why we're here. We're excited about joining God in this place and what He is doing in and through this community. The wise men teach us it's got to be about our commitment, not about our emotions. We still need to be giving our best. I heard a story one time from someone who went to Washington, D.C., and they wanted to go up into Washington's monument. And there was a long line outside for the elevator. And if you know this particular guy, he doesn't like lines. And Disney World during the past week would not have been a good place for him. So, he's one of these that likes to throw his weight around a little bit. And so he went up to the front guard and he kind of whispered in his ear, "Hey, is there any way that we could get up to the top any quicker?" He said, "Absolutely, you can take the stairs." There is never a line if you want to take the stairs. There is never a line for those who want to work for it. Hello? You can go up now if you want to take the stairs, and you can put forth the effort. See, God wants to use us to make a difference. He wants us to use our very best. When we come to worship, we need to be ready to give Him our very best. Be it on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. We need to be a people who give our best in all that we do. To give our energy. And to shy away from the tendency and the temptation to withdraw and to do just as little as possible. And then the third thing the wise men teach us is that they change their direction. Once they saw the Christ child and heard from the angel, they were never the same again. They changed their direction. You know, one of the things, especially for me as a pastor, but as I've studied the Bible, I always have wished that there was like a follow-up book so that we knew what happened with some of these people. I would love to know the rest of the story. Somebody used to do that, talk about the rest of the story. But so many of the Bible people, we don't know what happened. What happened to these wise men after they had this encounter? After the angel spoke to them, that long ride back. How different would they have been? Because I will tell you, I know how much my life has been changed as a result of many of the stable-like experiences where I didn't expect a whole lot out of this situation. And all of a sudden, God revealed Himself mightily. Because the reality is that stable experiences will mark your life. What seems to be like a disappointment, a low light in your life, can become a highlight in your life when you follow this example and you see it in proper perspective. That's the way it is with this table. For those of you who know the story, you know that at the time, Jesus was very much aware of what was about to happen to Him in His life. Father, for many of us, you have used yet another portion of the Christmas story to remind us of how intimately involved in every aspect of our own stories that you are. This has been a reminder for some of us how we live a conditional commitment to you and your kingdom. Lord, when we get our way, we're committed. When we don't, we withdraw. But you have never withheld your grace and love from us. You have repeatedly promised to never leave us. So, Father, forgive us. We want to be a people who are committed to trusting you no matter what. We want to look for you and give you our best. We want to be changed into the people that you have always wanted us to be, more and more like Jesus. Lord, as we gather around this table, help us to sense your presence. Help us to receive your forgiveness, and help us to respond by giving our lives in complete commitment as we place our hope and our trust in you. Lead us, Father.